Americans aren't born understanding the value of democracy or the obligations of citizens to one another or to the government or to the country if democracy is to thrive. We have got to teach it. We have got to model it. We have got to talk about it. We have got to call out those who violate it. And we're simply not doing any of these things.
I'm in the Oval Office and Trump is telling Paul Ryan that he works for him. And Paul Ryan says, "Excuse me?" And he says, no, you work for me. I'm the president of the United States. He says, Mr. President, there are separate but equal branches of the government. And by the way, I don't work for you. There's like 3 different articles. And by the way, I work for the American people, as do you. But it was a stunning conversation. And so if you ever get a chance to run into Paul Ryan.
Actually, that's a great anecdote because on so many levels, one, it captures the nature of our government, separate but equal branches, checks and balances. The idea that we all in the government work for the American people, not for an individual. You take an oath to the Constitution, not to the president or anybody else. The fact that this particular president, 45th president, would state what he said, what he did, tells you a lot about him. He does not have an understanding in many ways, I would argue, of the basics of American civics or citizenship. And it's part of a larger problem. I would say the same applies to a lot of Americans. We don't teach this in our schools, or if we do teach it, we don't require it. You can graduate from about 95% or more of America's colleges and universities never having been required to take a course in civics. Many of our high schools don't teach it, or it's what's taught is a couple of classes, and it's terrible. So here we are. This is a Holy Week. We're meeting. You and I are having this conversation. Today is Good Friday. Sunday is Easter. Well, Wednesday night was the first night of Passover. Passover is a holiday where Jews around the world gather around a table, have this ritual meal where everything is symbolic. And what we do is we tell the narrative of the Jewish exodus from Egypt. And what's so interesting about it, we do it in the home, because for much of their history, Jews couldn't have access to temples or synagogues or holy places. And the whole obligation of every generation of Jews is to transmit the narrative to the next generation. And that has proven to be vital for the ability of Jews to have survived the centuries and the persecution. And we as Americans, here we are in 3 years, we're going to be marking the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And one of the things we have essentially stopped doing is transmitting the narrative of Americanness to new generations. We somehow take for granted that we're born knowing it. And what I think the lesson is day in, day out, week in, week out, is Americans aren't born understanding the value of democracy or the obligations of citizens to one another or to the government or to the country if democracy is to thrive. We have got to teach it. We have got to model it. We have got to talk about it. We have got to call out those who violate it. And we're simply not doing any of these things. So you asked me why I wrote this book. That's why.
But you're saying a lot, so let's just go over it. We have this obligation to teach our children about the value of this beautiful vessel that was created for them. And we have this obligation to explain to them that this diffuse power, the separate but equal branches of government, has actually empowered the people. And it's led to more meritocracy. It's led to more aspirational opportunity. It's led to families like yours and mine living pieces or parts of the American dream. And what we also know, because you and I are both students of history, when you're in an autocracy or a dictatorship, you're limited in terms of your opportunity, because what ends up happening is there's uncertainty about the rule of law because the dictator is setting the law. You're uncertain about it. Corruption sets in. The people at the top of the rim do very well, and everyone else is in a scared, panic state. And so America avoided that for 240 plus years. I guess the problem I'm having is the apathy, Richard. Mm-hmm. We know this, and you argue this in the book, that we get the government that we deserve. So what happened? How do we get so out of control? When did the civic teaching stop? When did the people just say, let's take everything for granted?
There's no single event. There's no single date. One is just the gradual erosion of civics. And from what I can tell, Anthony, there wasn't an anti-civics movement. The analogy that comes to mind is musical chairs. When the music stopped, all the chairs were taken up by STEM or other requirements, and civics was somehow taken for granted. We don't need that. People get it, or the Cold War's over. It's no longer a priority. So partially, it just faded away amidst all the other calls on resources and time. Then we've had the whole change in the media landscape. We've gone from broadcasting to narrowcasting, and increasingly Americans occupy particular bubbles or ecosystems, which, shall we say, do not traffic in facts or the truth. I also think there's been an alienation from government the last 20, 25 years. Think about anybody who's under 35 or 40. What have they seen? They've seen 2 costly wars. They've seen 2 now financial crises. They've seen January 6th. They've seen gridlock at the national level. They've seen a pandemic that totally turned their lives upside down. They've seen crime growing. They've seen borders out of control. You name it. And so for them, they grow up and they say, well, what's so hot about this democracy? What's it giving to me? What's it delivering to me? So I think that not only have we failed to teach the value of our democracy, but I think a lot of Americans, I fear a lot of Americans are growing up and they simply don't see it. They don't feel it. And so we're seeing the alienation from government, what you call apathy. There's a sense a plague on both their houses. It's not going to make a difference to me or in my life. I think that's wrong, needless to say. And a lot of this book is a call to get informed and to get involved. Small numbers of Americans can have enormous impact. You look how close a lot of our elections are. Less than 1% of the people voting who didn't vote could turn things around. But a lot of people feel what you're feeling. I admit, I accept it, which is, again, the reason I wrote this book is I want to have something of a national conversation. I want people who preach in churches or synagogues or mosques. I want teachers. I want parents. I want others to basically remind people of why this experiment of ours is valuable and what it takes for it to survive.